So the good old Grateful Dead.
Yeah, the good old Grateful Dead. You know, I used to think that grateful was spelled differently.
Like Great.
A-T, yeah.
Yeah.
Like full of greatness,
like
or, yeah. Like, yeah. Yeah, it still weirds me out just a little bit how it's spelled, because I think of great, Grate, as like a grate in the ground, you know, that water flows through and leaves don't go through. That's...
Right.
I don't know. Weird.
It's the Grateful Dead. We've done a few of their songs. We've talked about them a little bit.
Love the Dead.
Love the Dead. Haven't done this song in a long time for the shout out. It was 10 years.
Yeah. I know some people have a hard time getting into the Dead too. And I'll say this, when I first started listening to the Grateful Dead, it was through you, and I did not get it at all.
I didn't get it either. I got it a little bit. I liked it a little bit.
Well, they wormed their way into my head through your ringtone, because you this is back when you would download ringtones, like and you had Saint Stephen. So any time that your phone would ring, it would do this little piece of Saint Stephen, and that was a Saint Stephen with a rose but it was catchy, and I was like, you know how things kind of enter your brain and worm their way in. So I liked that bit, and I said, okay, fine, but give me some studio versions to listen to, because I did not at all understand at the time that there was a difference between a studio musician and a live audience participation musician, where they really, really excelled in one and didn't give the same kind of energy in the other.
Yeah, it's hard to equate that. The musicianship's there on the studio cuts for sure. Maybe even more so in some cases, like with the harmonies and stuff, because they could hear themselves and real well. Where in the day they didn't have the greatest monitor systems, but the energy that comes with the live performance
different.
Of the Grateful Dead is somehow captured on live recordings most of the time.
I did not understand
captured. Doesn't translate.
A jam band, number one. I didn't understand their live performance, but I will say this. Becoming familiar with some of their a little more accessible songs, some would say maybe their pop songs, perhaps.
Their popular songs.
Like their radio play songs, something that got a little bit of traction maybe on radio.
Wouldn't have been very many.
No.
It would have been like
Truckin'. A couple others, but
Touch of Grey.
The ones that are just a little more accessible in that way, lyrically to me, where they were really easy. I mean, and in the studio version, you do get a lot of really easy to understand lyrics. So, like, having an in through there, though I don't necessarily recommend it as a starting point for the Grateful Dead, because I'm lyrically minded, that was an okay spot for me. But then you start getting excited about particular versions of particular songs. And I'm going, it's the same song. And you're like, no, but it's different when they played it in this venue on this year versus in this separate venue on this other year. Listen how they changed the tempo. Listen how they changed the groove. So-and-so is singing it differently. What? I was perplexed, but as I was just in community with you as you were listening to this, I began to have a respect for what they were creating. And even through the lyrical desert, I guess I should say, of drums and space, because there's no lyrics in this, but it was like a break for the band when the drummers would make this really cool jam together, and it was different every time. And understanding that the purpose was the improvisation, and the purpose was them creating in the moment. And as I became someone who enjoyed that on stage as a musician and creating space for the music to become, I began to respect what they were doing a little bit more. So slowly, over literal years, I became a deadhead.
Well, it's interesting because I think that at our core, deadheads are a little juxtaposed against popular music because it's steeped in an American tradition of improvisation. Music is improvisation, which is the Grateful Dead really did nothing new in the fact that they improvised.
Yeah,
it's just the format that they chose to improvise in, like the rock, country, Americana. Now we call it Americana format. Wasn't traditionally
improvised.
It
was more of a jazz thing or a blues thing.
Jazz and blues thing, and I think that as you become. Once you get the bug of improvisation, the bug catches you as a musician, it's hard to go back to the pre-formatted or the planned out, because, the spirit will catch you differently than if you're just reciting parts. It's interesting that, that a lot of the music that's doing the best today tour-wise is jam band centric, because you never know what's going to happen. There's something different happening all the time,
Absolutely.
And if you go to a Tedeschi Trucks band or a Government Mule Band concert, it's very common that you see the same people 3-4 nights in a row because it's different songs every night.
It is.
It's different performances even of the same songs.
Exactly.
You catch them. And it's a varied tempo, varied grooves, the nothing is ever the same way twice.
Right.
But the musicianship is high and the outcome is unexpected, Well,
it's part of the experience.
I personally would rather suffer an off night of a musician per se, and be hoping for the successes and catching the small successes than listening to something that I consider
find on an album, something you can just find on an album.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because even at a young age, I like Santana very much, and I've talked about that in the past. Yeah. And when I go to his concerts at that time, they were very unplanned, and the jamming was really good, And then I saw lots of artists in the blues rock genre that did improvise, in the blues world, like Robert Cray and B.B. King, and it's like. You couldn't make the stuff up. At 18 years old, I saw B.B. King for the first time, and he broke a string in the middle of his set. And he improvised by telling a story as he was changing his string, but the band kept playing. And he'd be telling the story.
That's wild.
And he told a story about how when he was poor and couldn't afford any strings, that he used to have to tie the strings back together. And that the real poor blues musicians used to get fat really fast. They were the fastest ones. The poorer they were, the faster they were, because they'd have to strip over the knots in the strings.
Wow.
That was his story anyway. I don't know how much truth there was to that, but
it doesn't matter. What a great story.
But it was improvising, and he improvised the show, not only the music content, but the show, because it wasn't like he just handed off his guitar to somebody else.
It wasn't planned to break a string and tell a story.
He broke the string, told the story, and so it was always that type of thing. And then, I at a young age, I'd heard a lot of the Eagles, and, there was the Hell Freezes Over tour.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Don Henley said, the Eagles will get back together when Hell Freezes over.
Right.
So they had that tour, and I saw it, and it sounded much like their greatest hits record.
Yes.
And I was kind of let down, I have to say.
You were much let down. I've heard this story often.
It cemented my belief in improvised music, in my belief that there's a special spirit that has attached itself to music, for one, and specifically to improvised music, because it's able to move within people,
I feel like it would be like watching a baseball game or your sport of choice, that all the moves were rehearsed and everybody was going to do exactly these set of moves. So Jimmy's going to get a home run on his third at bat, and Paul is going to have a grounder to, like that doesn't make sense to watch. That's not
true.
It's not the same game as if you're literally throwing curveballs and whatnot. And I think
that is true.
Watching music too, and I specifically look for it because we have our own stage language. We talk to each other a lot during a show without speaking to each other. And watching different musicians stage language to each other is really interesting to me, because it's almost like watching a different language. You understand what's being communicated, but they communicate it in a completely different way than we communicate it. So I find it really intriguing to watch these improvisational sections and how they have figured out how we're going in, how we're communicating, we're going to the next part, or we're doing this or whatever. So yeah, I find that equally fascinating along with my sonic experience of listening to the music.
I think that there's two ways to sum it up, right? There's two things that people like in general. People like familiarity.
Yes.
So hearing that song for the 10th, 20th, 100th time, the same way you heard it the first time. There's something to be said for that, so some people like that. And then there's also the crowd that wants spontaneity.
Right.
And they want adventure. And sometimes it's people that like adventure and spontaneity, but then also sometimes the people that are drawn to it are the ones that like the safety, and they don't have, an urge or an outlet for that kind of spontaneity, and that kind of risking it,
Yeah.
And I think that, at the time, the Grateful Dead was wildly successful, and even the culture of the Grateful Dead, you could argue, is still wildly successful today. And it was the Great American Adventure. It was like buck the system, follow the Grateful Dead
in a really beautiful way too.
And and a lot of times it was a very beautiful way. Now with any crowd of any size, you're always going to have the faults.
You got the bad apples and whatnot in there. People trying to take advantage of a situation.
As a whole, it was a great American adventure. So,
that a bunch of people got in on together.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a really great thing, and their music has definitely stood the test of time.
Yeah. Well, I like this song in particular too. There's one line in here that I just love, and there's nothing that you need to add or do.
Yeah.
It's simply making an observation. They love each other. That's amazing. There's nothing that we need to do. Even the observation of it is unnecessary. It is complete. And I think love is like that. Love, wherever it exists, it is complete. And there's nothing that we need to comment on or do, or, unless somebody's asking for help in a relationship. It's just beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that we need to add or do. Love is complete wherever it exists. So. Yeah,
it's interesting how, like, certain lines can stick out to you, and they may not even have, like, the meaning that they have in the song, It's just they become, like, a one-liner that resonates with you. And I think that one line that's always stuck out to me for whatever reason, it's weird how certain lines will stick out, is looking for a shove in some direction.
Yeah.
It's not like looking for a sign. It's not looking for like...
You need a push.
Not like a
physical
little
movement.
Not like even like a little push.
Yeah,
like it's
shove.
not like a push, looking for... He could have said like looking for a push.
It's a
like
shove.
Sometimes a push can be gentle, but this is like, no, like get in there.
It's not a nudge.
It's not a nudge.
It's not a suggestion.
It's not a suggestion. Yeah, it's not like a healthy hint or something.
Well, I actually thought for a while, because when I initially learned it, I learned it from listening, not really from like going and finding lyrics, how we used to have to do. And I thought it was Mary, as in a human named Mary, run around. And then it was talking about her love in the second verse. Like, so Mary the person, and he could spend his time around some other lines. So I was like, oh, these are about the two people that found each other. This is great. But no, it's Merry, Merry.
Yeah. Like,
as in a merry-go-round, which evidently is a common motif along with the trains in a lot of Robert Hunter's writing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like, and I think it's kind of the imagery is like if you're on a merry-go-round and you're just, centrifugal force, it kind of keeps you in place. And you almost have to have a shove to get off. Yeah. But since you're going around, you need to make sure it's in the right direction.
Well, the thing with Robert Hunter, too, and he was excellent at this, was having double meanings all the time. So you can take it that way. You can take it as a woman and man, or you can take it as the merry-go-round, of life or of love.
Or that you're merrily running around, but you don't have any purpose, so you need a shove toward purpose.
That's kind of how, at first I was like, I took it as the lady.
Yeah.
But then I'm on Closer Listen. Years ago I started looking at it as not. I've considered the merry-go-round, but I also considered it just like a happy run-around type of deal.
Yeah.
So that's the way I tend to favor it, is the merry run-around.
Either way, I have kept it in my head as people, because that's the original story that I told myself to help me remember the lyrics. So I'm watching the movie, and the way I process is I see pictures in my head, almost like a running movie. So I run movies to help me
remember lyrics.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I will come up with a specific choreography for my own self to help me remember in which order things go. Like the Beatles tune, Come Together. Yeah. Because the lyrics are completely nonsensical in my mind. I have a really hard time coming up with a story to go with them. Sure. So I have some hand motions for my own mind. I cue myself, nice. Because I don't know how else to make it happen. Nice. Because there's no movie to go with it.
And you'll never forget it, because you taught yourself in a unique way.
That's how we do, isn't it? Yeah. If we struggle to learn, then we try to hack our own brain.
I've always struggled to learn lyrics, and it is it's much easier for me to have a line or two that stick with me, and it's not always opening sign. It's just whatever.
Do you find too? I find this sometimes. When I'm learning lyrics, I like to have the lyrics with me for the first couple of shows as a bit of a crutch. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily need them, but it feels like nice. Safety net. It is a safety net, yeah. But sometimes when I feel like I've kind of graduated off the full set of lyrics, I just need the first bit, and it cues me into the next.
Yeah, that's very common for guitar players. A lot of times you'll see, especially when they're singer-songwriters, they'll have their little song list or their set list, and they'll tape it to the top of their guitar, and they'll put the...
they tape things to their guitars?
Yeah, back in the day, even more so. I haven't seen it as much recently, but they would tape a set list here, and then
that's
put down the first chord.
Interesting. Okay.
So then...
Like, where to begin?
Which oftentimes, you would think it was the key, but it's not always the same. So it's like... Yeah. But it's weird how memory works. It's like, sometimes you just need a little shove. Like, how does it
in some direction?
It starts on A. And then you take shove? It. Yeah, you get the shove in some direction.
You give it to yourself, though.
Yeah, you give yourself the shove.
Well,
hand signal, if you will.
You do have to be on your own team. Yeah. So, here's to being on our own team and helping preserve our memories through whatever means necessary.
Everybody has their own ways of doing things, just like everybody has their own music that they like or prefer. Right?
Yeah. So I have my favorite burner on the stove and my favorite spatula. Why not my favorite memory tool? And
of course,
these are adult things.
Absolutely.
Nice.